Now we're recording. So this week we're kind of continuing the financial award management, and we brought Wella Garcia in. If you guys are not familiar with her, well, you should be, because she's amazing. She is I think I was reading your bio. You've been here for 17 years, 18 years, something like that. And she's just a wealth of information, and she's our friend, people. She wants to work with us. So I think it's important to, sometimes we look at those central offices are like, oh, I think they're trying to kill me and make me crazy, but she's not. She's really not. So just to recap, let me show my screen. Okay. I think we just lost Bella. Okay, no, she's still there. So just to recap, last week we talked about award setup, award management. When you get your T32 award, you have different tasks, childcare costs. We talked a little bit about that. We talked about the expenditure codes for like stipends and tuition and fees. We talked a little bit about travel, the training related expenses, what are allowable and not allowable. We talked about benefits, postdoc benefits, because that is one of the most tricky post-award things, how their stipends they hit on the stipend task, but you need also the benefits will hit there too. And the benefits need to be moved off to the training related expenses task. So that is one of what's the word, complex things that you have with training grants is these postdoc fees. And then of course, some of them are unallowable, so you cannot move them to the training related expenses task, and they need to be moved to a completely unrestricted fund source. Rebudgeting, we talked a little bit about that. You can't rebudget any childcare costs. You could always move money down, as I like to say. You can, if you have extra training related expenses funds, you can move those down to any stipend or fee deficits, but you can't move money up. So if you have extra money in stipends or fees, you can't move them up to training related expenses. And usually that's where you have your deficit, because that's usually where you're putting extra program expenses, benefit costs are higher. So the rebudgeting guidelines are very, very different and more complex than an average, research grant. We talked about unliquidated expenses, and we also talked about unobligated expenses. So it's important to remember the unliquidated expenses and to know your budget dates for versus your appointment period, and the things that you can actually put on your FER, which gets submitted as an FFR to the agency. These are the costs you can put on there as obligated or encumbrances. And then there's this is just a picture of a FER, but then your unobligated balances, which is something that you can't touch because it's unobligated. So I think I'm going to let Wella take over from here.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you for the intro. I also brought with me Daniel Perdue. He is one of the assistant directors for Sponsor Project Finance. He manages pretty much half of the health sciences team, along with Jory Moore, and she isn't here today. So he is closer to the financial expense report process and working with you guys, but I can definitely, so he's here to keep me in line.
Okay. I can definitely, yeah, we'd like to hear that. I saw they were like, oh, there's a new person here, I don't know who this is. So thank you for introducing him. So I sent you some questions, Wella. I don't know where you want to start. Do you want me to pull up some of the questions, or what?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay. To me as a fund manager, I would be totally, and if I would be totally taking advantage of the fact that you're here and you could, ask you a personal question and not go through like 60 emails, So I think this is such an important session. So especially these things are just so complicated. So this was, I think, from Kristen. I'm gonna pick on you guys. Is there a way to separate? Oh no, this is from Holly. Sorry. I think it's from Holly or Kristen. Is there a way to separate out unallowable expenses more effectively and an efficient way to set up splitting fringe off of the stipend tasks from the beginning?
Yeah, currently there is no way in UC Path to do that. There's not a way to separate the benefits posting with the payroll. So whatever chart string you're using with payroll or stipends need to follow that chart string. I did talk to GEPA about finding a way somehow via their FSRT tool to help with that. That tool is sort of new, but she is aware of the issue. And so maybe in the future, we'll find a way to do that. Unfortunately, right now, you will have to do it after the fact. And I just was made aware that departments are able to process benefits cost transfer directly in UC Path. Right now, you may not have access to do it. And if you want to be able to do that in Oracle via a BCT, you will need to submit a ticket. You can submit it to us initially because not everybody may have an award that has the sponsor benefits restriction that may not be allowable. We have some private entities that cap the benefits and we'll have to adjust for that or move that after the fact. And so the idea is benefits should always follow payroll, and moving just benefits it's an issue, right? So that's why the access to that is sort of limited right now, but you should be able to actually process a benefits cost transfer. And if you don't have access to it yet, you can send us a ticket and then we'll review your request and we'll forward that on to UC Path so you can obtain that access.
So I didn't look up what Lindsay just posted, but I assume this is more on the process side of things on how to process this.
Yes, a benefits cost transfer.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That was my next question. Like, if you should, perfect. Does anybody have a question on that? Because I know that is, it's a difficult like pill to swallow sometimes, but as long as I've been at UCSD, benefits have always followed the payroll. So, I think if we had a wish list of things that we would like to see changed, do you know what I mean, in the future, that would be one of them, but maybe that's just my opinion.
So for the future with SI, like the new SIS system and like how we're doing the UAW contracts and stuff like that, the thing, like, right, I've been hearing from GEPA that potentially everybody is going to go into UC Path and that we can put in fellowship payments like we do for postdocs in UC Path.
So
rumblings I'm hearing.
So it's interesting that you brought that up, and I don't want to put Jen on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot, Jen, because I think she knows she can maybe comment on that. She's like, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot. Are you allowed to comment on that, Jen?
Yeah. So they did create new title codes for graduate student researchers who are paid on fellowships, extramural fellowships, and they will be entered into UC Path sometime in the future. And so that is correct. I think for this year that I think they're still paying it through their student financial systems, but that they will be transitioning to UC Path.
So then in the future, we could do benefit cost transfers in UC Path for this population.
Yes.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
Very cool.
I do have a question. I have a related question though.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're thinking about, so there's a new childcare reimbursement provision for the postdocs and the graduate students. And so my question is specifically for postdocs. Currently, we are processing the NIH NRSA childcare through the Concur Oracle system. But in the future, when all postdocs are eligible for this childcare program, they'll be entered in UC Path. So UC Path is creating an earn code. I believe right now, temporarily, we're using CCA, but and this is effective October 1st, so just around the corner. And so the question is for the NRSA piece of it, if we enter it in UC Path, I think we can add a different financial source. So I guess I'm just not sure how this would work.
Wella, have you heard of this?
Yeah, so for the NRSAs, it's going to be entered, on the fellowship title code, the fellow title code. We would add additional comp for the childcare piece of it. And if we do
It's
that,
its own
then
earn code, right?
it'll be a different earn code CCA.
Okay.
Will it be an earn code and additional comp? Like it would be additional
It'll be
pay.
an additional comp and then a different earn code. But it would still hit the training grant or fellowship.
That task four, right? Usually the task four.
Mhm.
Okay.
Which would be okay, but to your point, you're saying the departments could potentially change the charge string to pay for that specific earn code? Is that what you're saying, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Hmm.
That sounds like it to me. And to your point, maybe that's a solution for, this is a solution. No, this is CBR, so we can't separate that. So anyway, yeah, I was just thinking about the first question, right? The benefits, could we potentially just, separate that and put a different charge string? But yeah, I don't.
Or is this like a custom reporting solution rather than trading tasks? Right? Since like benefits are always going to be considered as a part of the top of your triangle. I can't remember at the top of my head right now.
As
Right.
the stipend task.
Yeah. Since they're always going to be there, is there not then a custom reporting solution for training grants? So you can track this according to what's allowable and what's not allowable based on account codes, right?
But CBR is just one expenditure type, and that's rolled into that one. I think that's the issue, right?
Mhm.
That's why we just have a percentage figured out for.
We just move off that percentage.
Yeah.
Percentages off of the CBRs.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just moving that manually, right? For now, like I've got to move a whole bunch from multiple training grants, one that expired, and I don't have to go through UC Path right now to do that. I can just do a manual CT based on the percent that's allowed.
Yes, you could do that, but know that your UC Path and Oracle cost will not be will not reconcile. So
Yeah, understood. But I'm just trying to think in terms of feasibility and reality of cleanup. I'm hoping that these costs won't need to be moved beyond that, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's something that we fall into with training grants. Oh, in an ideal world, or this is how we process, this is how we do it. But I think so many times you get a new desk like Kristen, and you get things, you have a lot of cleanup on your desk. And so it's hard to know, okay, what's exactly the procedure if I'm going back, so far, how do I do it? I guess that's what. So, and then when you have a huge, an abundance of issues that you need to take care of, makes things just more complicated, in my opinion. We did have a question in the chat from Nova going back to the childcare costs. So, and I wanted to reaffirm this as well. So it's our understanding, Jen, that the childcare costs will no longer be through Concur. It's all going to be through UC Path.
I cannot confirm or deny.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I put everybody on the spot. Sorry.
No,
Okay.
so for the employees, for postdoc employees, it will be through UC Path.
For postdoc employees.
Yes, for the fellows, it's not it hasn't been decided yet. There's still a lot more conversation that needs to be had, and I will probably be reaching out to you, Wella, to be a part of this discussion as to what would be the best way to handle, because we have not only the NRSA fellows, but all fellows, you know, and paid directs. And so there's a certain pot of money that will be set aside. Then how do we disperse that? And what's the best, you know, system and mechanism to disperse the money? And so, you know, obviously it'd be great to have it in one place. So if it's UC Path, right? If that's a way we can do it so that it's all in UC Path and we can pull reports from it and track the like who's been reimbursed these funds and from where, and that would be best, right? Because if we have it in different systems, then it would be harder to track, and we need to track how much, because they only get, you know, 2,500 the first, you know, year, and then 2,600 next year, and so forth. So we're still having those discussions, but but there's a possibility, a strong possibility it could all be UC Path.
Well, it's good to know this, Jen, that way, like, okay, you know, we're potentially looking at change, right? The whole process may change. So we may not know the answer right now. And I know I don't, like I said, I don't want to, I keep putting you on the spot, but we know things are changing. So we'll just kind of like keep our eyes open, like, okay, when this comes up again, right, we're going to go, okay, maybe the policy's changed and we better check on it, you know? So does that answer your question, hopefully, Nova?
Yeah, that answers my question. I just want to make sure that when that goes into effect, if it does, that we are made aware of that. So we're not processing it the wrong way.
Yeah, no, there'll be some communication on it. There's quite a few things that are changing, and hopefully with the office hours, we're going to be communicating more right now. So
I've been trying to reach out to UCOP on this issue for quite a while, and I just finally got the earn code yesterday that they finally created, or have a temporary earn code that we're using, but they haven't created the official earn codes yet, and so it's just slow moving. Trying to understand those pieces so then we know how that will then apply and how we need to process it, you know, on the campuses. So yeah, so I'm sorry we didn't have more information sooner, but we'll only work with what information we're given from OP.
Okay, sorry, Brett, I think we can move on to the next question if there isn't any other follow-up questions on that. So the next question here, let me just show my screen. There we go. So the next question is, and I think this one is Kristen's. Can we set up separate project numbers by budget year that are automatically created by SPF when the award is initially funded?
So currently, all of our NIH awards should have a project start and end date of the full award dates, right? Not year by year. So it's interesting that I'm seeing this request because for those departments who has those types of awards, the flow-through awards where the awards are obligated year by year, then that NCARE forward request for approval, that's when we have separate projects so that we can track the billing and expenses to that. But for NIH awards, your one project should have the full period and you shouldn't have any issues with, you know, moving forward with the following year changes or anything like that. And that's not the case on your award, let me know. But you know, we try not to create as many projects if we don't have to, because then you'll have to process direct retros, you'll have to wait for that combo code to generate, which could take weeks now, I believe. Sometimes it could only take a couple days. So if you're seeing an issue with the current training grant projects that you have and it's only set up for 1 year, let me know, because that shouldn't be how it's set up.
So my question is not because we're having an issue with it not, you know, going through year by year. This for me is because of how training grants are managed and just how difficult it is tracking projects year by year. I just feel like with training grants, it would be incredibly helpful to have an exception here for these types of awards. To be set up similar to how we do with our subawards year by year in reconciling expenses. And I, you know, to speak to the combo code issue and things like that, I haven't had that issue at hand as of late, especially with like one of my sub awards that I'm setting up for new funding. It's been pretty instant because the project numbers were set up well ahead of time, so things are ready to go.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that again, like I feel like I would just really love to explore this if SPF's willing, you know, to see if we could set up project numbers year by year for these training grants, given the way that they are reconciled and tracked and how and reconciling them each year in FERs. I think it would just be so helpful for us as fund managers and in general to set them up in this particular manner.
It's interesting, right, Kristen? You know that for your flow through awards, the projects are set up. You can use that when you need to, but the majority of the fund managers are not a fan of that process. I've had multiple conversations, at least every quarter, complaints saying, why do we have to have a project every year for my flow throughs? They're saying that it's very difficult to manage it that way. And so I'm trying to manage, the risk of doing that. Would it be helpful if we create different tasks for you for the same project for every year, maybe? Would that be?
I think, but then you're going to be looking at what, 20 plus tasks, because you're going to have a task for each year.
That's
for
true.
each type of thing. Like, and quite frankly, like the way we run training grants and manage them is completely different from a normal funding award with a subaward. I personally don't see the difficulty with having multiple subaward year grants like coming in. Like, yeah, there's a few challenges, and I think a lot of this is just due to people learning the systems and probably some staff turnover as well. But this is a different type of award, and how it's managed, I think it would just really make a lot of sense when we're reconciling these FERs every year and tracking expenses to be able to just really clearly see project year by year, what was expensed, what was leaned on, what's committed, and then move on to the next budget year. I think we could make it really smooth if we set it up correctly.
No, I hear you.
Sorry, that's my soapbox.
What
Thank you.
okay, so at the end of a budget year, when you're committing, for the future, so you have your unliquidated, right, expenses, so there's massive amounts of commitments that you submit in your FER, like, because those then don't align with the expenditure item date with the budget period, right? Because you've committed them in the prior budget period. Like, how does that work? Because your FER, so Kristen, this actually doesn't change the FER submission process, right? Because the FER is just based on the award. And since the award number is not going to change, you're not going to have a different FER. I don't know.
Well, we could potentially set up that FER that project to be its own FER just for the year. But the fact of the matter is we do report cumulatively to NIH. We don't actually just report for the year. So if we do consider this, we'll have to think about how we would report just for that year, but also considering what was it last year, which would be residing in a different project then in this case, right? So we'll have to take that under advisement. I'm glad Daniel is here, and are you guys the full population of fund managers managing training grants? Probably not, right?
This is not everybody. Yeah.
I got Glenn's green light or blessing, so there's one more.
Well, I second Kristen's like just having the different projects for the different years would be really helpful, especially for those training grants with postdocs. And I think that some training grants may not need this, and that have pre-docs or that just have pre-docs. Because usually they come in at the same time. I could be wrong, but oh, Nova is saying no. But for maybe not all of the training grants need to be set up like this. But again, I don't know if you want to have it standardized across all.
Yeah.
But training grants are very different from regular research grants, and it's really hard to reconcile every year when there's just one project or one task for each training each year, basically. So
I agree. I manage multiple, or I coordinate multiple T32s. They're all different. Some have grad students, some have residents, some have a combination of postdocs and pre-docs. Some have one or the other. I think that if you're going to do this, you have to do it across the board, because I can't imagine different kinds of reporting for different grants, because I manage multiple training grants. I don't want two different systems, because that would get really, really, really.
I think we would
complicated.
definitely want consistency, right? I mean,
We want
Yeah.
consistency.
we're all
Yeah.
for consistency,
Absolutely.
whichever direction we go to.
Okay, we'll consider that. I'll talk to our PPMSD folks to see how we can make that work in Sparkum. Again, the fact that we're reporting cumulatively every time we process the annual reports just to PMS or the FFR to NIH, and what that might mean in Sparkum, what that might mean in reconciliation. But if we're all on the same page, I will push for getting more information on how we can make that work with the current setup that we have, and I'll let you know when we can move forward with it.
Thank you, Wella. I appreciate that. I think, you know what, I think that's the biggest thing coming out of today is you're hearing concerns and you're going to take them back to your team. So if we haven't accomplished anything today, I think that is a huge one right there. So I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
Let's go on to the next question. The next one is, and I think Sharika is on the line. So her question has to do with an R25, which is slightly different, but it still kind of falls under the research education training grant question. So the question was, and we have a specific, we could give you the name of the PI and stuff, but there was a 10,000 stipend charge that was not previously budgeted. And she says, how should I move forward with reconciling this?
Okay. Daniel, were you aware of this issue? I saw that was the email was from Nick. No. Okay.
I was raising my hand to go back to the previous.
Okay.
Oh, you want to go back? Sorry.
Yeah, to the previous question. Just kind of trying to understand a little more with different projects versus budget periods. Would it primarily be the controls around the dates on the projects for separate years, so you can nail it down? Because the difference between one project and moving things between budget periods, and the difference then, in my mind, thinking this through right now, we would just be doing pretty much the same thing, but moving them between projects. Sorry, if you could just expand a little more on what would make it easier if we had separate projects, specifically as like I said, the dates out, or on difficulty reporting on multiple budget periods in one project.
I could speak to one thing that would be helpful. If you give each year of an NRSA grant its own project and the 3 tasks within that, a lot of the postdocs or the pre-docs that are appointed are not appointed on the start grant or the grant year start
Budget
date.
periods differ than the appointment periods, is what you mean.
Right. So so often what we have to do is we have to encumber whatever's going to be spent after the end date of that grant year, because the stipends and the benefits will continue past that. So it's easier if we have so it's easier to encumber one project than, or that year specific project rather than it running into the next year and then having to separate that out to make sure which year it's supposed to hit on. I see that as one major benefit of separate projects for each year.
Wait, can you repeat that last part where you're encumbering after? I'm just trying to understand. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
so Nita, I mean, or I can intervene a little bit. So these are what we talked about last week in the unliquidated expenses. So when you have someone appointed, your budget, say your budget period is July 1 through 6/30, right? But you can appoint someone anytime in that 12 months. So say if you appoint them 10/1 to 9/30, right? You're going to have to encumber or put on your FFR those 3 months of unliquidated expenses for the year when you do the reporting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
Yeah. So in a sense, if you had a different project, for each year, then you could definitely see, so okay, this is your 15, 16, 17, 18, and you may have different trainees. Sometimes your trainees are the same for consecutive years, but so I think that's what Kristen and Nova were saying. It's easier to look at from that perspective for especially when the years don't. And most training grants, the budget years and the appointment years do not match. And there was one training grant I've worked on in 25 years that they started everybody July 1 and they ended. It's all pre-docs. So
I think, yeah, just the tracking and making sure it hits in the right budget year. That makes it so much easier if you don't accidentally like forget to encumber it, or later you're looking like, I've had happen where I'm in grant year 4 and oh my gosh, things that were supposed to hit on year 1 were actually noted are actually, hitting in year 2, and we have a new fund manager and that person didn't remember to, put it on year 1, and now it looks like we're in a deficit in year 2. For those reasons, and it's really super common, this is for me, this is a huge headache. Trying to make sure the right things post to the right years in the reporting.
But those would be like totally different than the expenditure items, dates, right?
They would have to go so when we set up different projects, that project start date would have to correspond to the year that to the second year, let's say, right? And we're talking about encumbrances when we're encumbering appointments that cross over to the next year. We'll have to pay that person in that second project, right? Not on the first project.
Right.
So that's what we're saying here is that then now we'll have to move this person's appointment to year 2 projects because now he needs to be paid in year 2 because those monies cross over to year 2.
Which would mean that we would need to then move funds for SPF would need to move funds between projects, right? So you have to have a carry forward balance, move to a new project.
But I still feel like this would be so much easier tracking overall, given the state of what we're in with these training grants and across campus. Like I understand there's a reporting need here and that's doable as well, but I think this just is going to make things a lot cleaner and crisper, and even standardized processes. I don't know how people report on training grants right now. I feel like there's a lot of inconsistencies and decentralized ways of doing this.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely working on, it on my end, in my department, but I feel like this would just help standardize across the board of how we track these and how I have to talk to different departments too, with moving postdoc salary and everything. And I just think it would be so much easier and clearer, when we're tracking these year to year and even when things change desks.
So then if you did have a carry forward, would that solve your problem as well? If we move the carry forward, like the unobligated amounts from year 1 to year 2 to that project.
I think that would make it more confusing.
Oh, okay.
If that's the case, you have to pay them out of year 2, and the encumbered amount from year 1 has to be moved to year
That's
2
it.
project. Then that gets more confusing because that doesn't really solve the problem that I was talking about. It's easy if year 1 funds could stay in year 1 and the entire amount for the stipends, regardless of whether or not they're encumbered, would stay in that year 1 project, then that would make it easier. But if the encumbered amount has to move to year 2 project anyway, that would make
does.
it more confusing to have 2 separate projects, I think.
Yeah, because think about your final reports, right? If we're encumbering some students, which I've seen happen from an old award to the renewal award, those funds move to the renewal award. You have to pay those students in the renewal award, not in the old award, right? So same thing here. If you are encumbering from year to year, if we have different projects, you'll have to move the encumbered people to the new project. So I think it would be helpful to run through the different scenarios or different processes that we have on these training grants and really take a look at the value of changing that to a year by year project. Just go through all of it. I can work directly with Nova and Kristen and whoever wants to be included in that conversation, so that we're making sure that we're not creating more work for everyone at the end of the day.
Yeah, if that's the case, then I would vote not having new projects for every year.
I think this will be something we could take offline, Wella. Yeah,
Definitely.
because I think that's needs to be explored a little bit more.
Yeah.
Daniel, did we answer your question or clarify or make it more confusing for you?
No, that was good. I think that I didn't quite understand what the benefit would be. So I think, yeah, further conversation could be needed, because in my mind it was one or the other, kind of the same thing, moving between budget periods and moving between project, but there may be a reporting need that we are unable to, or is very difficult now because of the budget periods and projects that are easier to kind of report on. So that's, I think, what in my mind, what I was kind of getting at, that we still have to move any encumbered funds or unliquidated obligations between budget periods, and we would have to move them between projects because they're going to be spent in that next budget period or in that next project period. So I'm happy to also be a part of any further discussions on that.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
my first action item. So I'm going to continue with the question. This one's from Sharika Blackman, who's on the call. She has an R25,
Okay.
and she said, because that's different because you have the participant costs. But she said there was a $10,000 stipend charge that was not previously budgeted, and she says, how should I move forward with reconciling this?
So I looked into this award specifically
Oh,
and
okay,
looked at
thank
the NOAs in year 1 and year 2. It was pretty clear that all the trainees would need to be paid salaries and benefits, not stipends. And they're very strict on their budgets. They're very clear as to which budget is it supposed to go and what pay it needs to go to. So this $10,000 stipend will need to be corrected. I found out that if we use the wrong earn code in UC Path, meaning stipends versus salaries, departments need to submit a payroll adjustment form. And they said it's in the UC Path under payroll forms library, probably in Blink, and I have that form specifically. So we'll need to make corrections on that. It sounds like we appointed a person the wrong way. So does that help, Sharika?
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yes, it does.
Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Do you have the form?
I'll send Jill the form so she can
Okay.
send it out to everyone. I'm sure you're not the only one who's noticed
Mhm.
some wrong appointments going on out there. And in the beginning, people were saying there was no way to correct that, and I think it sounds like there is. So
So,
Okay.
so my follow-up question with that, Wella, is if it was paid as a salary and it needed to be paid as a stipend, is this gonna affect their taxes?
Right, right. And that's something that we need to have a conversation with.
Okay, so yeah,
me
that's always
and-
an implication.
That's always a big implication, exactly.
Okay,
This came up for us too, and we had and on multiple fellowships in our department, unfortunately, and in some cases where it was, I guess, more than, you know, a year old, my department was working with Central Campus to just change the account codes, and which, you know, definitely is not a best practice, but you know, that's what they were recommending to do.
That's what we did in the past because there
Yeah.
was no way to do it. But you're essentially saying,
Right.
I mean, that's
No,
a
I know this is
compensation.
not I mean, this is not a good option to have, but
Yeah.
I'm hoping that, you know, we've hopefully stopped the bleeding with some of this, and you know, everyone understands going forward, even with like ARC too, because when you do a funding change in ARC, they don't clarify on positions, and a lot of new fund managers don't even know that these postdocs might have multiple positions. And so people are putting, you know, fellows on RO1s and all this other stuff. And, you know, I really wish they would change that system so badly on the health sciences side.
Yeah, that is a big no-no, paying stipends on a regular research award and vice versa. So it's something we need to be.
and that's always a sticky issue when you have those tax implications come up, and especially then if it's like really far back and you're like, oh my gosh. Yeah.
Can I ask a question about this form?
Sure.
I actually have, me and Amy, she's on here. We have a postdoc that was charging to one of our training grants. He was removed at one point because he ended up being hired and he, you know, became a fellow or whatever. So his position number changed. And somehow or another, he got put back on our award for a period of time. I need to move all of these. And I reached out to our HR, I reached out like our finance department and everybody trying to figure out how to remove his stipend that was recharged to us over to a regular earn code to his new position. That form that you have, will that help?
Yes.
That? Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're
I would
welcome.
note with, if I remember correctly, Wella and Sharika, that this R25, I think, and I saw another one recently, if I remember correctly, it lays out in the special terms and conditions too. I mean, that they are paid via salaries and stipends, and that prior approval is required for any reallocation between budget line items in that award too.
I think there's a follow-up question on that. So the trainee salary was included in PSC, right, of the budget, and that line is specifically in the participant support cost box is compensation. So we would have to pay these employees with salaries and benefits. And so the question was, how do we account for that? If you want to account for the participant costs separately, I recommend just creating another another task for it. And that's how you're separately tracking these costs for participant costs, because we wouldn't be using a PSC expenditure type because these are they're paid compensation, right? So you wouldn't need to get prior approval for that.
Okay, thank you.
So Sharika, that your question's been fully answered?
Yes, because I was thinking I would need to rebudget because it was listed in the participant costs and we were paying them salary. So
Yeah, but if you look at that line, it says compensation. So
right. Okay.
Cool. Thanks, Wella. So my last question, and I think you have this one too, Wella, is we had the Ginsburg question. Did I send this one to you as well?
Oh, yes.
Do you want me to read it out loud?
Sure.
So can you use unobligated funds for a carry forward request from prior budget periods that have accumulated from year to year? Or are we only able to use unobligated funds from the previous budget period before the budget period we are requesting for?
Mhm,
Uh,
okay.
And Luna's on the line if I think, yeah, it's Luna, right? She works with Dr. Ginsburg.
Okay.
Yeah, Jill, that was my question.
So normally these carry forward any type of restricted balances you can technically request, right, for to carry over to the next budget period. I know some departments actually purposely don't touch those those restricted balances until like the tail end of their award so that they can potentially request an NCE because they do have now those extra funds. But in the case of training grants, so these unobligated balances normally occur when funds are not used in any budget year due to those unfilled slots, right? And most of the time, they use these unobligated funds to offset future year commitments because they know exactly how many slots you're gonna have for for the next year. And I read a note in their policy, carryover requests for trainee slots will not be considered, but in rare circumstances, carryover for trainee related expenses and travel could be considered. So there's the caveat there. But again, you have to have a strong justification. You need to work with OCGA on that. And you never know. But accumulating, restricted balances from the first year through second year, third year, I think you could always try, requesting that. If you have a strong justification for it, they'll probably approve it. But I personally have not seen, again, and NIH automatically just offset that in the future years as they see slots for each budget period. I haven't seen one where they actually carry it over as an addition to whatever slots you may have for that, for whatever allocation you have for that future year. Does that help?
Yes, that does help. So Dr. Ginsburg has an unobligated balance of about $330,000. And that's due to 2 budget periods having 2 unfilled slots. So it accumulated. And then this last budget period, he actually filled up all the spots. So I haven't done the FER yet, so I'm assuming he probably won't have very much unobligated funds for this last period, but over the span of the project period, he has accumulated about $330,000.
That's a lot. And I don't know how you could justify that for just TRE and travel costs. So
Okay, so it wouldn't we wouldn't be able to ask for stipend with that?
I don't think so. If you have all your slots filled, right, and budgeted for, again, you could always try it. And I'm not the GMS, so they're all different and they might consider your request.
Okay. Yeah, NHLBI actually specifically has on their site that if all slots are filled for this project period and there's carry forward, then we could request for an additional.
Okay.
But it was just more of because I had done a carry forward for Dr. Martin several months ago where we had asked for carry forward that had accumulated, but then it got rejected by the GMS and they said that we would only be able to use carry forward from the previous budget period. Okay. So I was a bit confused, and then I've talked to several people and I've gotten like just different answers.
It really depends on who you're talking to in NIH. They're all, they're just like us, right? Managing their own awards, and they may have different interpretations. And so if you feel like you have, the policy to back up your request and you could really justify those costs, I think you might want to approach it from the angle of the PI talking to the program officer, because those are, GMS and program officer may not see eye to eye. And, if you can approach it from that side, then, he might approve that carryover and persuade the GMS to give you that carryover.
Okay, so reaching out to the program officer.
Yeah.
I may have missed this in that request that was denied. And they said you could only request from the prior
Year.
obligated balance from the prior period. Had they used prior unobligated balances as offset in future years, so in their mind, those funds may not be available.
I don't know. I don't have an answer, but the weird thing about it was the GMS was actually the one that reached out to us and told us that we could use the accumulated funds. And then she turned around and rejected it and said we could only use last year's. So that was actually quite confusing as well. But you know, we were just like, all right, we're just gonna do what she says. Doesn't really matter what she said before. This is what she's saying now. So we would have had to did it, and it ended up being approved for the last budget period. But like, I just, when I look at the NIH grant policy, it doesn't really specify like you can only use last budget period or you can use accumulated funds. So that's kind of where it gets tricky. But now I'm kind of understanding that interpretation is up in the air for
Exactly.
I think Wella could probably speak to this better than me, but sometimes GMSs and then the financial folks have different I'd say conflicting, I don't know the opinions is the right word, but I can see that. And if you want to send that prior one, I'd be happy to take a look at the award to see if there's anything that could at least help fill in some details on in that situation. And maybe I won't be able to, but I'm happy to look at it.
Okay, for Dr. Ginsburg's T32 that I'm currently working on, or okay.
For the one where they rejected your request, I'd like to see that too, because I'm curious if those funds were appropriated, has been past the appropriation period. These NIH federal awards has an expiration of 5 years, right? And if you haven't used up, you know, those within the 5 years or drawn it down, especially if it was restricted, then that might be the case where they're saying, no, you can't actually touch that anymore. It expired last year, so you can only touch the, you know, the recent amounts.
Okay.
So maybe that's where that GMS is coming from.
That kind of makes sense because for Dr. Martin's carry forward, she was carrying forward from the past project period. So we were in the first year of the cycle.
So hers was from the renewal from Strathy, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, to Martin. Okay.
Whereas Dr. Ginsburg, he's in his last year of the cycle. So I don't know if do you think that could have been like a major?
That might be it. Yeah, I mean, we could see in payment management system the history of the obligations and when they were obligated. So I mean, we have another example of an award where it was actually a transfer to UCSD and we received it 3 months before the award ended, but those appropriations from the other campus have expired. And so we couldn't draw down any more after September. And that's $200,000 that we couldn't draw down, even if it was actually transferred to UCSD, but because it expired, we couldn't do anything about it anymore, unfortunately. So
okay, what documents would you like me to send you?
If you just give us the project number, we could look into.
Okay, for Dr. Martin. Okay. But in regards to Dr. Ginsburg, since that's what I'm currently working on, immediate course of action would be to reach out to the PO.
If the GMS is not agreeing to approve that carryover, I would have the PI reach out to the PO, because that's where the science side of things, he can approach it from there.
Okay, so we should reach out after we've submitted our carryover request or prior to, because we haven't submitted it yet.
I would wait, because GMS might be okay to approve that request.
Okay.
So.
Okay, so go ahead and just put in the documents with the balance, that the accumulated balance that we have, requesting from the accumulated balance. All right.
Follow up. I have a follow-up question based on that. If you're in year 5 of
Mhm.
your 5-year grant and you are requesting funds in carryover, but you're in year 5 already, would that be reasonable? Or since you're in your last year anyway, what are you going to use that money for? You know, since you're in your last year already, is that a reasonable request?
Again, I have seen departments wait until the end of their project period to request carryover if it was restricted so that they can justify getting an NCE. Then you would have another year of that award.
Right, but T32s, they don't typically have an
They
NCE.
don't, exactly. So I don't know that it makes sense for T32s. So.
Okay, that was just my question because I can't, with my conversations with POs that I've had, you know, with different T32s that I've worked on, they've told me, you know, you're in your last year, why would you need the carryover at this point?
Exactly.
So I'm just curious what the other people have, you know, if there's been any experience with that or if it's a normal thing to do.
So it's almost the top of the hour. It's 12:57. Does anybody have any other questions for Wella? Well, I think we went through all the questions that were submitted ahead of time, but does anybody have any more questions? Everyone's so shy. Okay, I'll take that as a no then. But anyway, this was recorded, so I'll post the recording and the slides online. Anyway, thank you so much, Wella. Thank you, Daniel and Lindsay, wherever she is. And then I just wanted to remind everybody, so next week, Jen Bork is going to be in our office hours, and we're just going to talk about postdoc issues, questions, processes, stuff like that. And so I think that'll be a great session too. Cool. Thanks, Wella. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you guys
having
so
us.
much.
Have a good
Bye.
afternoon.
True.